borderline communities that I think water is distributed both through the Teton and Beaver Water District that are actually take water out of Beaver Lake. But those are really don't fall under our non-riparian permit per se, or at least we haven't interpreted to that extent, because basically those are parts of distribution systems and they're primarily remaining small in comparison. They're not large uses that we typically would think of as a big, diversion out of the lake that's going directly to the state. So that's kind of the situation that exists as the gentleman here's comment referenced. But we don't have any large diversions that we're selling water to, either one of those states right now. So they're contained within the distribution municipal water usage primarily.
This movement of the federal government over the last few decades to increasingly take over states' rights, stuff that ought to be done in the state, like all this stuff you're doing. The EPA, they got their own bureaucracy and other aspects of the federal government. May I suggest that as you put this plan together, you do just what they did with that deal that you said. They built it, going to make it difficult to export water. I said, before you present it to the legislature, you give some suggested legislation, anticipating that they're going to come in and do all kinds of things, because there's executive orders already written, pretty much take over every drop of water from now till the Lord comes back. And I just suggest you put something in there so that you create some legal level of resistance, because we know what's coming, because they're just getting bigger and bigger. Can I suggest that you write something in your smile?
Good idea.
That's one of the reasons to do water planning on state level, is so that where the federal government is looking at water issues, if we already have our policy that we've arrived at through a process that involves the citizens of the state, then we have something to say to the Corps of Engineers, EPA, etc. This is what we've decided we're going to do with our water resources and why we're going to do this.
Go ahead, Dan.
We'll see.
Great. I think, again, we hit on this pretty well. What I want to highlight, I won't repeat things, but what I want to talk about on the demand forecasting, I just want to reassure folks that, again, that we're looking at multiple demand sectors. So we're going to capture all the major water uses that are out there. The typical ones that you look at are the agriculture. When we say agriculture, the devil's in the detail. We'll actually be looking at what types of specific crops are we going to be looking at, what kind of different crop mixes over time, will we need to plan for any potential reasonable high demands in terms of increased temperatures and increased crop consumptive use, what kind of livestock should we include in that forecast, what kind of growth rates are we going to have. So the point being is, by sector, there's a lot of detail in there, so stay tuned for that. When we come back, present again, we're going to probably identify all those major sectors and forecast them individually, and then we want to tie them to source of supply, so whether they're supplied by surface and groundwater, and then we want to summarize those, again, depending on if it's from the aquifer, that might be done at a more regional level. If it's from surface water, we'll want to do it more at a watershed kind of a level. And then we want to roll that information up so we have a statewide demand. So we'll be able to have it locally, regionally, and statewide by sector and by source of supply. So you'll be able to really look at it a number of different ways. On the supply side, again, we just don't want to forget our water quality component, but we've kind of hit on this idea of how much do we have, what are the capacity of those resources to provide us the water, surface water and groundwater, as well as water quality. We've hit on this, you guys are a pretty astute group, is we've got to look at the legal aspects as well as the physical aspects of supply. And we've also got to look at the conveyance capacity, how we actually then use that water. And again, Ken kind of hit on this a little bit, is looking at data, potentially simulation models. Typically, you come up with criteria to indicate an unacceptable impact. This gentleman kind of raised, yeah, those are important. What are those criteria that would say, no, that will harm our long-term future? And then we want to define that for current conditions or a baseline assessment, and then apply those future demands and management practices. Just a note, again, not getting into too detail tonight, but even defining current conditions can be a little bit challenging because each sector will have maybe slightly different data from it, but we'll work through that. We're going to try to strive for about a 2005 to 2010 timeline. But we got to really look at that data over the last 20 years to look at what a reasonable representation of those demand sectors really look like to define current conditions. So it might not be a single year, I guess, is the main message I want to send to you, because that might not be the best representative year for every single demand sector. Highlighted the physical and legal availability a number of times now. You guys picked up on it early. That's outstanding. The law does give us some guidance in terms of how we look at policy, in terms of priorities, and we'll be, when we talk about those existing policies and programs, I just wanted to use this to highlight that, is looking at the importance of domestic and municipal in-stream flows, federal water rights, sustaining life, health, and wealth. So those are all some things that we'll look at in terms of the existing policy and kind of how we look at shortages and how we look at water during those times. And again, just a real highlight, we're trying to look at multiple purposes, looking at all uses of water, both in-stream and off-stream. So ecological and wildlife fish needs as well.
I have a question. Pardon me, please. When Clinton was in office, it was his goal to get all rural society off the wells. And he gave a lot of $1 million to the regions. How many wells, do you have any idea how many people live on wells in the state of Arkansas? What percentage is it?
We do know that. I don't personally know that. We do know that. Jim, I don't know if you have it off the top of your head.
Just on rough draft, isn't it over 50%?
I know that there are about 400,000 just on the alluvial aquifer alone, mostly in eastern and southeastern Arkansas.
Sally Ann, she was asked, I think, about rural, what we'll call, individual.
Domestic.
Yeah, domestic.
I don't know. Ed, do you have a number?
Well, we will have that number. Randy, you figured out the numbers, you recall what they are?
89,000 private household wells. That was determined by taking the population of the state and deducting all the people on community public water systems, non-transient systems, and the remainder would be the best estimate, assuming everyone who's not on public water has a private well. So it'd be about 89,000 wells. Assume 2.5 people per well. You come up with 180. Well, you can do the math, but it's about 2.5 Arkansans per private household well is what I would use. Times that 89,000.
So about 10%. We'll certainly be refining and looking at it on a county basis and then allocating probably with the watershed. And one of the things that will likely, that's a great example of is it a good thing or a bad thing, right?
That's what you gave all that money out.
Well, depending on where you are, what your densities are, sometimes regionalization is a positive thing, meaning providing a regional solution versus individual solutions. And that's why in some areas it's likely to not be as desirable, and maybe in other areas it maybe isn't more sustainable. Just like lower density, the water quality system. That's what we're trying to paint that picture of. Are there areas where opportunities for regionalization could happen, combining service areas or systems or creating systems? Great question. That's that infrastructure side that we haven't hit on too much. Are there some economies and scales that will improve reliability and water quality? Just we hit a lot on the off-stream, what I call off-stream uses as we take water and we we put it into our communities and our businesses. And I did want to make sure we hit on the fish and wildlife flows will be an important component of water, because those will kind of define what's important to maintain ecological health, and that then informs are there opportunities to manage surface and water and groundwater together for other purposes. We haven't come up with a complete methodology yet, but what we've talked about is a general framework to look at some of the common fish and wildlife attributes or resources that are out there and recreational, what types of fisheries, what kind of wildlife, what kind of hunting clubs, how is water used for that. What we want to do is then once we kind of characterize those resources, get a sense of have we missed anything from stakeholders? Really highlighting some of the important and priority resources and why they're priority. In some cases they may be because they're important economically. In other cases maybe they're important just because of their unique high value, like Buffalo National River as an example. The reason that's important to establish those priorities is because in some cases those resources are already protected. So you can kind of identify them and say, yes, that's a valuable resource and here's how it's protected under state or federal law. In other areas, maybe additional protections are necessary. Maybe in other areas, it's like, look, maybe there are opportunities for additional water development. So that's what you're trying to do is get a sense of where those resources are and how they're used and why they're important. Maybe piloting, we've been talking about piloting some additional quantification methods that really look at different ways of looking at the science behind what's important ecologically. It's extremely complex and an emerging science right now. I think what we've learned that there's a minimum flow that basically can sustain fish and wildlife, but it sustains it at kind of a suboptimal level, if you will. But at higher levels of flow, it's more optimal and more suitable for those species. So you have a more vibrant or healthy or diverse ecosystem. And what's that balance? A lot of states have really had that minimum flow program in place that's just enough really to kind of maintain survival, but not really that looking at those opportunities for maybe a more optimal flow condition. And where does the policy and the science come together on that? This will be an extremely lively debate, I think, going forward, is really looking at those trade-offs between those uses and opportunities to protect these vital resources and going back to our vision and goals without impairing property rights and providing for economic development. And that's, my introductory comments was taking the science and the art and the social dynamics now of creating a water plan. And this is really where it comes together, I think, when we start talking about this part of quality of life. So stay patient, stay with us. This will get emotional. I've been through it a number of times.